Hello, and welcome to the New Mexico Bureau of Geology and Mineral Resources Geographic Information Systems Informal Lecture Series. I am your host, Phil Miller, and today's topic is going to be on the Stereo Analyst Extension built by Hexagon Geospatial. The problem with doing this lecture right off of the bat is the fact that ArcMap is no longer available to most clients, and the Stereo Analyst extension built by Hexagon Geospatial is basically deprecated at this point because of this. That being said, I thought it was really important that since we have new mappers in the Bureau who have never worked in photogrammetry, it's important that we go ahead and cover it. The part that's going to be frustrating is I do think that the Stereo Analyst extension works better than the stereo map view does in Arc Pro. That is a bit of a personal preference, and it's also probably a byproduct of the fact that I've been working in the Stereo Analyst extension for 15 years. So for me, this is old hand. This is easy to do. The Pro is different, and I am encountering problems that I'm struggling with. And there's also a lot more hotkeys that get in the mix of working with the stereo extension or working with the stereo map. So there are things that are going to change, but I do think that this will set up and be a good precursor towards working in photogrammetry for all the new mappers in the Bureau. So first and foremost, as you can see, this is in anaglyph mode. I'm not going to go into the difference for setting up a computer for anaglyph mode or for the PluraView 3D monitors or the two remaining active shutter monitors that we have in the Bureau. That will be done in a configuration when I'm getting everything set up. We don't need to worry about that in the grand scheme of things. I will try and get that set up for you. But part of what I wanted to cover is some of the toolbars and some of the settings that you will be using because of the personal preference that comes into working with the stereo analyst and then knowing what you're doing. So I thought this was kind of good to cover. So right off the bat, I've basically cleared out all of the extensions that you saw from last week so that I can function, so that I could show you what they are. So if we right click in a gray space, the drop down comes down. If we come down to basically here, all of the remaining toolbars that say stereo from this point down are tied to the stereo analyst extension. I'm going to go ahead and there's a part of me that wants to skip around on going over these because I think it's more important to know the ones that you're going to work on. But there's also a part of me that wants to go through them from the top down so we understand. I don't know what the right answer is, but I'm going to do it in the order of what I think are the important ones. So I'm going to come to stereo view right off the top. This is the one you work in most of the time. So if I click on stereo view, this toolbar pops up, and this is the basic functionality. This is the one that you as mappers will use when functioning in this window. There are a lot of different things that are enabled in here. We talked about one last week where we can flip left eye and right eye. So if you're wearing your anaglyph glasses right now, blue is on the right, red is on your left eye. I don't know if I have my video mirrored, but blue is on my right eye, red is on my left eye. If I click this button, what this does is in the software, it flips which image is the left eye and which is the right eye. So again, we're talking about parallax. So left eye is seeing this side of the image, right eye is seeing this eye of the image. If we flip those, just like my peak turned into a valley when I crisscross them, the same is true when we're working in the photogrammetry. So currently left eye, right eye, if I flip them, the high points turn into the valley. So I'm going to demonstrate that really quick. And we can see that weird things happen and it's hard to kind of get a grasp of what's happening unless you start moving around. And it should now look like this valley river bottom is high and these mountains are low. If I flip it again, it should go back to looking normal where the valley is low and the mountain ridge and plateaus are high, mesas. So that's what that button does. There's a couple other things that are functional here that are kind of useful. One of them is synchronize arc map display. So set the geographic extent of the stereo window to the extent of the arc map display. Stereo window to the arc map display. So if I click that, we will see that the geographic extent of the stereo window corresponded to the extent of the ArcGIS. The opposite is true. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this over here, and then I'm going to say synchronize geographic display, set the geographic extent of the arc map display to that of my stereo window, and we see that it snaps that back. So that allows you to synchronize the two windows together. It's fairly convenient to use. The other one that is really extremely useful is the zoom in, zoom out, and pan. There is no mistaking that zooming in, so I clicked the zoom tool, I click in, it zooms in. I click the zoom out tool, I click, it zooms out. There is no mistaking the function of that is extremely useful. You will end up using that quite a lot. I should also do that flip here. So this will make this look very weird. So now it looks like the river valleys are a ridge line. If you've got your anaglyph glasses on, you should be able to see that. If we do it the other way, then everything works like it should. So zoom in and zoom out. The other thing that we're going to talk about with this is there's also hotkeys associated with this. So if I'm in this view, oops, I didn't mean to click. If I am on my pan tool and I click the F3 key, oops, I need the navigate key, sorry, and I click the F3 key, I now have control of my cursor. If I hit the Z key, I zoom in. If I hit the X key, I zoom out. The F3 key releases my cursor back to my control outside of the window. If I want to work in the stereo window, the F3 key puts me into that stereo window, and currently my cursor is controlling where I view. If I hit the C key, my cursor is free moving and the window stays locked in that pane. As I'm sliding around with these views, I currently have the continuous terrain following option turned on. We can see that the cursor appears to be floating on the mesa. If I start dipping down the hillside, the cursor looks to follow that slope and drop down to the valley bottom. If I hit the F3 key to release that cursor and I now have control of my mouse in any window, that is this button right here. Terrain following mode. If I turn terrain following mode off, click on my stereo window, press the F3 key to where I'm moving around, the cursor will end up looking like it's floating. And man, that's really hard to see. Let's zoom in and see if we can make it better. Yeah, so it is kind of hard to tell, but I can tell currently that it looks like the cursor is floating above space versus floating on the surface. This works better in the active shutter, and it absolutely works better when we use the PluraView beam splitting polarized technology. Forgive me for demonstrating this and not being absolutely crystal clear. I can see that this is floating, but again, this may be the 15 years of use of this software. If I hit the F3 key again to release the cursor to my mouse, I can turn on continuous terrain following. If I click on here, hit the F3 key, we can see that it does look like it's snapping to the bottom of the surface and the top of the mesa. This works better with a beam splitting technology. I promise it is extremely clear when your cursor is floating above the surface. Okay, so those are the main ones that I wanted to talk about. Oh, no, that's right. So then there's also the pan button. So if I click pan, I can pan around without entering into the stereo view. I don't have to lock my cursor into the stereo view. I can bounce around, click on whatever I need to outside of the window, but I can still pan my stereo view. In order to work in the 3D floating cursor mode, we have to have the 3D cursor active. Then we have to click on the stereo window to activate it because the F3 key only works on the active window. And then we are back in that view. And again, I am currently in a free floating mode. If I hit the C key switches to a cursor centered mode, and it does not deviate from that. The cursor is always at the center. When you're this is great for panning around. This is really hard to digitize in, and it really slows the computer down. So when you're actively digitizing, my recommendation is pan to an area, hit the C key, and then start digitizing what you want to digitize. It will be faster and your vertices will register quicker as you're clicking them. Those are the big things that I think are the important ones to cover in here. Yes, there are others that we could talk about, but I think for getting folks functioning in here, those are the main ones. So I'm going to leave that one for the time being, stick to manual toggle. And then there's zoom in, zoom out, pan. We're going to skip fixed cursor mode because that ties to the C button that I'm pushing. You can do it from here as well. Then there's the continuous terrain following. So your cursor sets on the surface of the land of the photogrammetry, and then synchronize my views and also invert the stereo model, because as this north arrow is facing to the right now, so north is to the right, there are times where the north arrow will flip directions on you, and sometimes you will need to switch which eye is left and right. Sometimes you may want to just flip the window to where north is always facing away. So I didn't demonstrate that, but that's what that does. We can see that because I flipped north, my left eye and right eye are not in sync. So I need to switch the view. Now north is to the left and up is up, down is down. So these two have to function in sync with each other if you use the flip window view. If you never flip window and it flips on you, for the most part, the images are oriented the right way most of the time. You won't need to use the inverted, but it's good to know that these two functions exist because you really have to pay attention to this arrow when digitizing, when panning around the maps. So the next toolbar I want to talk about is the Stereo Analyst root. The reason why this is, there are times where you will use this and there are times where you will not use this. The reason why I'm going second for the main thing is because I wanted to go over function, because you'll be spending most of your time in function. You won't spend most of your time in settings. So that's the reason why I'm talking about this one next. I think this is the next one that we need to get into because we're going to actually talk about the physical settings. This one is critical for functioning. This one is critical for getting things set up. So if you open up ArcMap and your stereo window is missing, if you click on the stereo window button in the Stereo Analyst toolbar, it pulls up that Stereo Analyst window. This is the ability to select image pairs by where you are here. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom out. I am going to switch to the manual selection of a location. I'm going to come over to my cursor here, or to my ArcMap window here. I'm going to move to a different area of display with my tool selected to select the image pairs. If I click in this window, the software in the background does a little bit of analysis, tries to figure out which image pairs would be the best one for the location that I clicked. And then as we can see, it went through a couple of different iterations. And now we are looking at the area that I clicked. So if I zoom out, we can see that I moved from here to here. So this then auto-picked the pairs that it is actively displaying that it decided was the best pairs for the area in which I clicked. Okay. The auto load image pairs. I know people who have used this well in the past. There was a point where I default used this all the time and it was very functional. It tends to get a little frustrating to me, and I would much rather use this now as I've evolved using the software. But I want to highlight the fact that you can also have the software auto load pairs as you navigate around. And I'm also going to show where the frustration is going to come in with this, because there is absolutely an area of frustration for me. This may be different for you. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off the image pair selection tool, switch to the auto load. And what I'm going to do is enter in the map, and I'm going to start going to the north. As I start going to the north and get off of the precise image pair that it wants to use, we will find that we lose one of the images, and you will see now half of my screen definitely has a blue view, the other view has another view, and right there it just switched on us. It loaded the next pair. So now I can keep moving over. Notice north stayed to the right. I keep moving, I keep moving, I keep moving. Ooh, sorry. I keep moving. We then get to the edge of another image pair. I move over, it switches. North stayed to the right. That is remarkable. It's not actually doing the thing that normally aggravates me. But as we keep moving, this can be convenient when it does this. It's great. Oh, and it kept doing it. So north is still to the right. There is typically a point where the north arrow flips on you. And this is where this can be a little frustrating, because when the north arrow flips on you, you will start navigating. You will continue navigating to the right, but instead of heading north now, you're heading south. And then the image switches on you. And then you try to go the other direction, the image switches on you. And then you try to, and the image switches on you. It gets kind of frustrating. So this one is actually working fine, and I'm kind of shocked by it. I haven't had one that works really well. So I'm actually going to go a different direction. Let's go to the east, get to the edge of an image pair, and see if we can force the issue on an auto load as we go to the east. Uh-oh, I'm locking up my computer. Come on, computer. Come on, computer. And it stayed the same way. That's funny. Interesting. Just be mindful. Watch that north arrow. It can flip on you. So be mindful of which direction you are moving, and note that north is not always up when we're working in photogrammetry, and it has a relationship to how the pairs overlap with each other. Um, Speaking of that north arrow, so the main button, sorry, one more thing that we need to talk about. The main buttons of this functionality are that open the stereo window, select image pairs, or auto load image pairs. You also have the option to manually pick which pair you work on. I'm going to call out Dan Koning. He does a pretty good job at knowing which direction these images are working, left and right, up and down. And he can do a job where he typically picks the pair, knows which direction he's navigating to, and then can switch to the next pair in the set and continue digitizing his lines. Dan, if I'm incorrect in understanding how you work, please let me know. Cool. Yeah, I thought so. And that is another way of functioning. Instead of picking the tool to select the image pair, you can manually select from the list of images which pair you're actively working on. So there is convenient in that, and I would be uh, lazy if I didn't demonstrate that to you, because that can be a functionality. The key thing that you have to pay attention to are these numbers. So 2157 and image 2156 are the current pair. I can't do it, but if you wanted to move one direction, you'd change one of those pairs to go one direction. You'd change the other set of the pair to go the other direction. That really takes playing around with and knowing the map area to figure that out. It's why I tend to function this way, because I'm typically not mapping an area. I'm usually demonstrating. So I don't have that expertise like Dan does. Okay, so those are the main functions that we wanted to talk about with this window. I do recommend having this one up all the time, but it is kind of the second most important. The key thing for this one and why I wanted to get this one open, and then we'll return back to the rest of the toolbars, is we have to talk about all of the options that are set up for us. And the example I'll give is that north arrow that we were just talking about. So if we click on the Stereo Analyst dropdown, and come to options. We talked about devices last week. So if you don't remember how to get your stereo mouse to work, remember, go back to that video. It's in the devices. But let's go to the rest of the options. So I'm going to go to Stereo Analyst options. I have mine pre-configured for what I function with. The key thing, I'm going to go through these by tab, mostly option by option, and discuss them with you. So one of the things, and I don't remember what default setting is, so I'm just going to say I have set, not you will need to set, because I don't remember what is needed to set. I hit autopilot on this so quick when I turn these settings on. When I come and help you new mappers to work on this the first time, I'm likely going to come in here and just set a whole bunch of settings and not explain it because it is such a second nature thing for me to do. Please forgive me, but that's what this video is to do for you, to let you know what they are. So I set orient ArcMap document to image pair when image pair changes. So it will kind of orient this north to this north if they flip-flop. ArcMap document follows my stereo cursor. So as I'm bopping around in stereo view, my ArcMap will follow along in that same, preventing me from having to synchronize. The synchronize is nice because what if you start panning around separate because you want to go look at the feature to the east of here? Then you can pan around using the pan tool. Then you can resync the two of them back together and then continue mapping. ArcMap document follows stereo window extent. Same thing is true, cursor to cursor, window to window. And I think I said that backwards. This is the cursor, this is the window. Display oriented images, display footprints, display oriented images and footprints as per ArcMap table of contents. This window is displaying as per the table of contents for what I have turned on. That is relating to what layers I have in. So currently, if I zoom in here, we can see that this window is this yellow box. My cursor is that green dot. That is the footprint of my cursor. The area of interest, yeah, I didn't think that would display because I don't think I have an area of interest set. Yeah, it doesn't. And then the extent of the footprint of my stereo window. So again, this yellow box is correlative to the extent of my window. And then the image footprint layer of what images are selected and active in my stereo window, and the full list of all of the images that are available. Sorry, not the list, the footprints of all of the images that are overlapped. You can see this stripe is the area of overlap. So that is what that does. It displays this based off of what is set in the table of contents. That's how I function. Okay, footprint oriented images, you can change the color of these so that you can distinguish one from another. That's what these settings do. I never mess with the image pair threshold, percent, minimum, or maximum. I don't even remember what those do anymore. In the stereo display, so in my stereo display, currently I have it showing me the entire image pair. That's why when we got to the edge of the map, we only saw the blue eye and didn't see the red eye because it was showing the extent of the entire image, not the image pair overlap region. So if we only do the overlap region, when we get to the edge, it will go black for both eyes. I like knowing when I'm getting to the edge of an image so that I don't keep going and have it auto switch on me and me not register what happened. I like seeing when I'm getting to the edge, having a left eye image, but missing the right eye image or vice versa. So I tend to operate this way, but if you just want the image pairs where they overlap, where there is a stereo view. So if I do this, sorry, if I do this, this is where the overlap occurs. This is my right image. This is my left image. These do not have overlap here. These will not display if the image pair overlap region is selected. Only the image pair overlap region is shown. Auto load image pair, when I clicked this button, it automatically is loading them based off of what I'm navigating around in. That is also this button right here. These two turn on this toggle. The threshold is how long it takes to toggle, or how long it takes to register that you've gone off. So it registers pretty quickly. I don't mess with the epipolar correction. I used to know what that did, and then when I went to play with it, because I thought I remembered what it did, I was wrong. So I just use the epipolar correction and I leave it alone. I never adjust that. And again, I don't remember what it does anymore. Um, Contrast. This is where Pro has a marked leveraged advantage. It is here in ArcMap, but this is where Pro excels. But what we can do, instead of doing percentage, for the default contrast stretch method, we can set it to standard deviations or min-max. When I switch to min-max and click apply, watch my stereo window for the color of what happens and recognize what's happening with the fact that you've got red and blue glasses. For those of you that will have the beam splitting technology or the active shutter, this will be slightly different for you. You will get the true variations of these. So I'm going to switch to standard deviations and click apply. Not entirely useful, and it looks like we're off the image. Sorry, I didn't realize we were off the image. Sorry about this delay. This is one of the things you will have to deal with when working in photogrammetry. Some things take time to load. The image pairs do take time to load. The comment that I'm going to make, and I want all of you to forget it as soon as I make it, please. The plan for the Arc Pro photogrammetry stereo window is that every single photogrammetry station in that uses the Arc Pro photogrammetry will have a hard drive in it with all of New Mexico's stereo pairs at your disposal. That's how much quicker the software is when it is in Arc Pro, is we don't have to load in the project area. You can have the entire state at your fingertips. We will function differently with this in the future, and we'll talk about that when we get there. That to me is a huge advantage. The statement I'm going to make is bear with me to ensure that I can make that happen, and now blank that from your memory and pretend you never heard it, but that's the hope. I am noticing that it did the standard deviations, but for whatever reason, it looks like it only did one eye, not both eyes. And I'm really confused by that. Let's do min-max instead. Maybe that'll be better. Yeah, I can tell it's not doing both eyes, and I forget now why it's not doing both eyes. I'm going to switch back to percentage, click apply. It's still not doing both eyes. What is going on? Weird. I'm probably going to have to do something here really quick and oops. Interesting. Normally what this does is it'll take both images and adjust the stretch of the contrast to allow different methodologies of adjusting the histogram of the image to display the image in a way that makes it easier to view. When we go to Arc Pro, this is what I was talking about. This works so much better. It actually works, and it'll adjust both images so that you can look at it like you're looking at, it's not different spectral reflectance, but it will give you different histograms that will allow you to highlight units from one another in different ways. ignore me for a split second while I do something to get this back corrected. Okay, so we're going to try the default stretch again now that we're on an image. So there's standard deviations, and you can see that it adjusted the contrast for a standard deviation grouping. We can do min max, and it looks slightly different. We can do linear. This will probably make it look gross. I usually do not like linear, just so everyone knows, because it kind of flattens it. No contrast stretch. Equalize. And then back to where we started at percentage. With the red blue, that function is a bit hampered by the tinting of the lenses themselves. With the beam splitting technology, the polarized lens filters, these things are more noticeable and they're less affected by the tint of the glasses. So that is a way that you can use that function to help yourself identify rock units by adjusting that contrast stretch. We'll get to how to adjust the contrast and high dynamic range manually, but again, I haven't said that yet. I recommend turning on the use dynamic range because without it, things look a little flatter and a little grittier. With that dynamic range on, it does tend to look a little bit better, cleaner, easier to tell the difference between the units. I'm also kind of a fan of the min max. That's a personal preference of mine. That starts to look more true to color for New Mexico. Again, adjusting for this issue. Um, that's opinion. Those comments are opinion. Okay. Use map symbology in stereo window says exactly what it says. Use the map symbology in the stereo window. So if you draw a normal fault with a bar ball, it'll draw the normal fault with the bar ball. It won't just be a generic line. So this honors that setting of recognizing the symbology used in your table of contents to honor that in the stereo window. Use map layer visibility in the stereo window. This says if I have something turned on, make sure it's turned on over here. I can override that in this tab of the table of contents if I choose to. Currently, we can see that the table of contents shows that my contours are showing, but the contours are not showing. That's because I've overrode that setting in this tab of the table of contents. Exclude duplicate feature classes, kind of self-explanatory. Draw feature vertices. If you need them, you can have them turned on. I tend not to. And then legacy image pair manager is fine. I wouldn't worry about the block file manager. Okay. Stereo display advanced. This is kind of the important one because this is where you turn on your north arrow and you can have it be a simple north arrow. There's with the N so that you can identify north from north with an N. Oh, and I'm not seeing it. Interesting. I tend not to use that. I tend to just use this, the simple arrow. Oh, there it was. Wait, what? Anyway. Clearly it says simple arrow and now the N is on here. We're having glitches. Arc is probably about to crash on me is probably what that translates to. The color is the color of the fill. So if you needed this to be a different color so that you could see that, You can change the color of that. I tend to leave this white. There's nothing wrong with that. And you can change the outline color, you can change the thickness and things like that. Don't worry about the AirDOS raster support for the images are TIFFs. Yes, they're turned on. You won't need to mess with it because they're all TIFFs. Um, I'm not going to go into the stereo synchronized cursor at all because we use the other cursor. So I'm not going to worry about that really too much. And then the photogrammetry project filters, don't worry about those either. That's again sort of like the AirDOS raster support. It's other ways you can do things, and we don't mess with them much. Okay, and then there's the terrain following cursor. Again, this button controls this checkbox right here. So you've got two locations that you can set that. You probably mostly want the terrain following on when you're bopping around so that you can see the ups and downs and you'll visually register that when you're moving around in the stereo window. When you are digitizing, if you want it to use the elevation from that, you will see that it functions better if you turn on apply continuous following. Otherwise, I can't remember if it puts it on the datum or above. I can't remember what it does, but there's some reason why I'm saying turn that on, and I can't remember the specifics of it, but my recommendation is leave that on. Elevation type, use the image correlation, and this is what we talked about last week at the end. The image correlation to pick up the elevation. So use right eye image and left eye image to do the math to determine the elevation from the image correlation. Correlation options, don't worry about messing with those. Just leave them at the default. They'll be fine. I forget what this does anymore as well. Feature attributes I tend not to mess with. Area of interest I tend not to mess with. And vertical coordinate systems, again, I tend not to mess with. I would just leave those as the default. 3D floating cursor. So this is where you can turn on and off that 3D floating cursor. You can change the cursor correlation color to set. So that is green right now. Green is again that good correlation. Yellow is the poor correlation. So if we wanted it to be more contrasty so that we could tell the difference, we could do a blue for poor correlation and the green for good correlation. I'm going to go ahead and click in the image, come here. We can see the cursor is green. If I come to a tree, a bush, or a shrub, or a cliff, correlation goes to poor correlation because we're on the side of a cliff. The two images don't agree with each other, so it has a harder time knowing how precisely it is picking up that elevation. And that elevation that I'm talking about for this location is displayed right here. So that shows that it is roughly 1776.611, but it's also letting us know that that isn't the best it isn't the most accurate elevation. Again, it doesn't really matter that much. It's just information for you might not want to place a point that has that if you really want to pick up that elevation. There are other ways we can circumvent elevation. I'm going to go into that at the end of this discussion if I get through this quick enough. So that's how we can adjust that. For the red blue anaglyph, I do recommend setting something to the effect of blue and red because that actually works really well when you're doing it, because with the anaglyph glasses, blue and red show up really well. So this should now look black to you. In your left eye, you will not see it. In your right eye, the blue and red make it black. When we have good correlation, when we have bad correlation, oddly enough, the blue looks like a blue because I didn't pick the same blue. In red, it kind of disappears because it disappears. But that's how you can use those to better understand your correlation. Blue and red are bad because red goes black. And that's, I'm not, like I said, I'm not going to get into the RGB CMYK discussion about why that is, but it is to your advantage to probably set it to colors that work for you to help you see. Yeah, and really it should probably be blue and yellow or blue and green so that you can see the difference between yellow, good correlation, and blue, poor correlation of elevation. Okay, so we've covered that. You can also just leave it as the green red. Again, it isn't hurting anything. Oops. It isn't hurting anything when you leave those at the default. Come on, ArcMap, hold it together for just another 15 minutes, please. Ba, 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 ba. Don't worry about the graticule cursor rings, but you can put rings around your cursor so you can see a distance to things. Again, this is photogrammetry software that's designed for photogrammetry stuff, not for geologic mapping. We're kind of using it for purposes that aren't, it's not intended for it, but it wasn't what it was designed for. Virtual 2D to 3D, don't worry about this. And then grid drive opportunity properties, don't worry about that. Those are the base settings. The other things that we have control over functioning is the stereo enhancement. So if I click on stereo enhancement, again, we turned on that dynamic range in the options. This button controls that dynamic range checkbox, allowing us to affect how the image looks. I prefer having dynamic range turned on because this is it turned off. It's a shame that ArcMap is crashing on me because when it shows really quickly, you can see the color difference with it turned on. Hello, with it turned on. You will see that it looks more like the colors that you would see out on the ground. You can adjust your, let's see, this is brightness, this is contrast. You can adjust your contrast by grabbing this roller wheel and sliding it right, sliding it left. You can click buttons to increase contrast or decrease contrast instead of clicking and dragging this. You can also reset to factory settings by clicking this button right here. You can click the button to reset the contrast. You can also adjust the brightness of your image. Again, it may be beneficial if you're having a hard time differentiating one unit from another. And if for some reason that brightness affects that or the contrast affects that, you can play with those sliders to bring different units up. The key thing to take home away from this is remember to always reset your brightness pretty periodically if you do those adjustments so that you can always get back to the default setting so you aren't being led astray by some other factor like vegetation can have an effect on it. And you're not interpreting a setting in the display of the images as a lithologic differential. I do tend to leave this one docked as well because it is super functional to turn on and off that dynamic range. The next toolbar I want to talk about is ten minutes. Okay, we mostly don't use the stereo rooftop. We mostly don't use the stereo rooftop extended. We mostly don't use the stereo rooftop snapping. The That's not the one I was thinking of. Or is it the one I'm thinking of? That's it, all right. Um, oh no, these are them. These are them. Sorry. These are the three extensions that you will use regularly. It is uncommon for the other extensions to be used. There isn't much functionality with what we do with them in this environment, so you can ignore the advanced editing, the rooftop extended, and the rooftop snapping. One thing I would like to talk about, if you have issues where when you are digitizing, you go off of the stereo pairs, or you're digitizing. And again, this is where the overlap is. This is where there isn't overlap. And you're digitizing over here. Your image, your vertices will not pick up the elevation. So they will snap down to the datum. So you'll have topography being mapped. And then if you move off an image pair and click a vertice, it will map down to the datum. In that case, this line does a normal contour, drops down, and when you switch to the other pair, it'll come back up. So you'll have this area that snaps to the datum. If that happens, it's not the end of the world. We can always correct it. If you need to digitize something that's off of the stereo pairs that are provided to you, you can use the Update Z feature, navigate Update Z feature. You would load in your contacts and faults into the input features. Your input surface would be the spatum in meters TIFF that we provided you. And then you can do probably a bilinear interpolation to apply that elevation that's missing. Sorry, to apply the elevation from the raster to the vertice where it was missing and bring that point back up to your land surface without the image. The problem with that is all of the elevations that you got from here get overwrote by that. The part that's really hilarious is I can't remember, Kevin Hobbs would be the person who I'd want to ask this question to. He asked me the question at one point, what's the elevation difference between the 1 meter LiDAR, the 4.5 meter spatum data, and what it's picking up from the stereo pairs? I did an analysis. It was in the decimeter level of differences between the two. So if it's, 1786, it's at 1786 for all of them effectively. And then you can skip the status field. But I did want to bring up that you can update the Z feature if you get off of the map or you get off of a stereo pair. Dan, what question can I answer for you?
Yeah, I just want to clarify. So this, when you do this, it doesn't overwrite all the Z's,
It
just the
does.
missing.
That's what I said. It
Oh, it does do
overwrites all
all
of
of
the
them
Z's.
in that feature class.
Yeah. If you would load in contacts and faults, because again, that's what contacts and faults or map unit polys, those are the features that you're likely to be digitizing with photogrammetry.
Yeah. Okay.
When you do this, it overwrites every single vertice's Z value with the raster you input. But again, I'll say that statement again. The variation between the 1 meter LiDAR, the variation from the from the 4.5 meter spatum, and the variation from the photo pairs is decimeter level. That's where you see it. So if it says 1786.3 meters, it's going to vary to 0.4, 0.2. It's not going to vary in that actual meter. And when we report those elevations, we always report they're accurate to 1 meter. That means we ignore our significant figures from our decimal points because they're out of spec, because it's accurate to the meter, not the decimeter. So it's in the noise of precision error.
Okay.
Does that
So
answer your question?
yes, and so if you have a few vertices, say you have 3 or 4 that are base level, I mean, is it a really big deal to do this, or can we just leave it as those three
You
first?
could leave them, but you might as well get everything on the surface because so we currently aren't using the 3D mapping to its fullest potential currently. Being that the input of the LiDAR, the input of the SPATM, and the input of the stereo are all accurate to 1 meter, and we're talking about decimeter level of error, it's not bad or wrong at all to do this. If you leave it, Dan, 10 years from now, when we actually start using the 3D mapping, someone's going to come in and overwrite it for you
Okay.
because those vertices are going to be missing. And again, we're accurate to 1 meter. We
Right.
cannot say 0.8 is better than 0.6 is better than 0.365. They are
Okay.
accurate to 1 meter. All of them are accurate to the meter. So those decimal figures should be scrubbed from the data. They will be scrubbed from the data anyway. Someone
Okay.
will ultimately end up taking that vertice that doesn't have a value and they will be applying the elevation vertice to it.
That sounds like when we turn the maps in, you round up to the nearest meter.
We do not round up anything.
Oh, you don't? Okay.
The the LiDAR data, the precision reported in its plus or minus is meter, right?
Yeah.
That's the image itself. That is literally the LiDAR data. They report it's accurate to the meter. Does it have decimal places in there?
Yeah.
Yeah. Does the SPATM data report to the meter or decimeter? It reports it's accurate to 1 meter. Does it have the decimal in there? Yes. The stereo images are reported as being accurate to 1 meter. Does it report? It absolutely is reporting. If you look right here, you can see that it's reporting the decimals. That is not accurate.
Yeah.
It is accurate to 1 meter. All of those values are accurate to 1 meter. So the fact that it contains it, it means that is not relevant. It's not relevant. It's imprecise retention of your significant figures, right? This is a significant figure discussion. So if you're doing any math with it, you kind of need to ignore those insignificant figures.
Okay.
LiDAR, SPATM, and the stereo images are accurate to 1 meter. So if it gets applied, either of those, all of those vary in the decimeter level. So the LiDAR will be off by a decimeter or two from the SPATM. The SPATM will be off from the stereo pairs by decimeter or two. That gets washed away in the noise when you look at the actual values. If you're doing analysis, you should ignore those. You should only be reporting significant figures.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Does that make sense? I mean, I understand what you're getting at is no, but it says 0.386. Yeah, but it's not true.
Yeah. I understand.
Okay. Any other questions? So that's what I wanted to cover. Now, next week, I am going to start meeting with individuals to start working in photogrammetry, demonstrate some of this stuff, go over some of the nuance, show some of the problems, and actually sit there and work with you a little bit while you're working on these so that you can get familiar with it and have someone next to you to help you out with all the problems as they occur. So if you want to start scheduling those with me, I believe Andrew has already scheduled me on Monday. Feel free to schedule me, each of you, look at my calendar and schedule me for, hey, I'm ready to do some photogrammetry stuff. Let's get you immersed in the environment, start using it, and get comfortable with it. Other than that, that's all I have. Are there any other questions? Any comments? Awesome. I would like to thank you all for participating in this informal lecture series. It is an absolute joy to give this information to you all. I do enjoy this with all of my heart. In lieu of teaching the GIS class, this has been my outlet for getting what's here to you all. And I definitely enjoy it. And I want to thank you for participating. I could not do this without the GIS services program. Amy, Andy, Tyler, Hannah, and Amanda, there is no way that I could get set up for these meetings and be prepared to display and discuss this information if it wasn't for all the help you do. And again, to Mike Timmons for allowing me to do this GIS informal lecture series on Bureau time and present this as a topic that gets posted to YouTube, and then the world can take avail of my information or misinformation, as it were. It makes it available to everyone. So I want to thank everyone for participating. Have a great week, and we will see you in the next session.